Okay. Right, afternoon everyone. Nice to see you all. Just, I don't know if you can hear, I'm coming down with a kind of head cold, so if I'm getting a bit croaky, just, it's not the nerves, believe me, it's just not feeling so great. But for the session this afternoon then, I wanted to talk about what for me is a kind of a really neglected area in AP, which is preparing students for academic seminars. So what I'm going to be doing is just having a brief look at approaches within the AAP to seminar preparation as it's presented in some of the published literature, and just see how the kind of understandings of academic seminars in the that we seem to be having of the wider academy. I'll be presenting some research that I've conducted in a particular discipline, and then I'll look at the implications of that, not just for the discipline that I've been working in, but in terms of our thinking about disciplines generally. So I've mentioned that I feel this is an area that we haven't really given sufficient thought to. So if we think about the importance of oral communication in higher education, then we can think about how one of the purposes of higher education we might think is to prepare students to function in a globalized society. The university that I'm based in, Leeds, is very clear about the fact that it's preparing students for future academic professional contexts, and the oral communication plays a key role in these contexts. And very importantly then, it's often through oral communication, co-construction of ideas, that students develop understandings of the discipline, disciplinary lexis, also of the epistemological, ontological underpinnings of the discipline that they're working in. So what I'm going to do then is starting on that basis, I'm just going to share with you a very kind of brief overview of like some published materials which I feel have got currency within EAP, and then just to talk about the way that they're approaching academic seminars. So what have I taken here? I had to cut the list down. So I've just taken some key course books. I've taken a couple of practical EAP teaching guides, and then I've taken Cottrell's study skills book because it sold 1 million copies. And I feel that not just this text, but the ideas which are contained in it seem to have a lot of currency within EAP. So if we look first of all at the column where I've indicated the degree of seminar focus, this is really kind of rough and ready assessment of whether these publications actually try to define and explore in a detailed manner the oral genre of a seminar, or do they sidestep it and talk more globally about discussions, about speaking skills, about working together in groups, etc. And you'll see here then that actually there's very little discussion. In fact, in 3 of the publications, there's no reference to a seminar. I can understand why, because it's problematic. Yeah? Because the publications are for students going into a number of different genres, in different contexts, etc. So there seems to be a flattening out. And one of the things that I'm concerned about is whether we ourselves may be working with a generalized, idealized, imagined idea of a seminar, and then that's having a knock-on effect on the skills and language that we're teaching. So the final column is the degree of disciplinarity which is reflected in the publications. Now, clearly, if there's limited reference to seminars, then there's even less reference to disciplinarity in those. Interestingly, the two EAP teaching guides both have sections on disciplinarity, but that is mostly focused on written genres, and I feel this is where we've made a lot of ground in terms of thinking about the importance of disciplinarity in written academic discourse genres, but we don't seem to be up to speed in the same way with the oral genres. So, just to summarise the main elements there then, the published materials are working with generalised descriptions. One thing that comes through very strongly is that there's a strong emphasis on presentation skills. We seem far more confident in terms of what's involved in these, the terms that are involved, the language that's involved, how we can break this down into a series of skills which we can teach in the classroom. There's a focus on collaborative group work in these publications, so working together, the language of working together, the importance of working together. There's a very strong tendency for functional language to be included. So many of us will be familiar with materials for the functions and language of agreeing, disagreeing, interrupting, adding points, etc. But what does come through is the fact that there's very little evidence base to this, and my concern is that in these imaginings we are washing out really important information for us, both for pre-sessional and in-sessional courses. So, as part of a much larger project in the School of Media and Communication, I've been interviewing lecturers and students, observing classes which are being taught, and accessing literature, the module handbooks, etc., and looking at the programme literature to get a sense of the discipline. And one of the first things you can see that begins to define the field is the actual physical spaces. I was particularly pleased when I came in actually and I saw these pods, yeah? Because these are quite common on, especially in the digital media courses, which are very popular within the School of Media, because typically they will have networked, connected laptops so students can work in groups like this, which automatically breaks away from an idea we might have of these seminars, because these aren't timetables of seminar sessions, as being plenary round group discussions. So that was one thing that we find. Another is that there's a lot of media production on these programs, so students producing videos, podcasts, obviously photography, etc., which is taking place in digital learning labs, large screens with the necessary software, as well as the kind of standard classroom settings which seem to be represented in the literature. So this is kind of a slight aside, but I think it's important in terms of just muddying the water and problematizing the situation. For the classroom-based formats, which are more plenary-based, these were exclusively teacher-led, exclusively teacher-managed. Now, the EAP literature often suggests that we're trying to help students to lead and to manage seminar settings themselves. Now, I think the skills that are involved in that could be useful for students, but what you actually see there is, especially undergraduate level, these seminars are often consolidations of lectures, very teacher-fronted, and then there's a progression towards them becoming perhaps having more student involvement. And the key area I want to focus on in terms of the data today is looking at the many different activities, often group-based, small group-based, in groupings like this, or in individual tasks, which are incorporated in these seminar sessions. So, when you look at these activities and begin to group them, you can begin to get a sense of how we can begin to define the field with these different functions. So, critical understanding of the academic field obviously is dominant here, and I think this is typically what we associate with a discipline in the social sciences. However, quite a lot of seminars are devoted to helping students to develop research skills, both for academia and also here for their professional research. Students are involved in digital production, and also I'm sure it's similar in many of your institutions, but there's a strong employability drive which is embedded within these, and so the activities are preparing students for future employment. I did cut these lists down, but I wanted to give you a real flavour of the diversity of activities and which are taking place within these seminars. So in terms of the critical understanding of the academic field, as you can imagine, students are analysing news stories through the lenses of gender, race, political positioning, etc. Students are engaged in digitally based activities such as data scraping from the internet, and then discussing their experiences of this. There are quite a few planning tasks that are represented in here. So the example from journalism studies, deciding rules and structures for a new news agency. Could have perhaps phrased that a little better. But what you can see here is then that students are already involved in not just evaluating, but also there's a lot of description, there's a lot of detailed explanation of digital artifacts here. We've got group presentations of literature reviews, presentation of chosen images. There's quite a lot of this show and tell. But then, perhaps in order to move away from a traditional format, there are also adversarial settings where, not just in political communication, but there were some good examples here where, in terms of structured formal debates, there are issues such as whether tabloid news is good for democracy, whether objectivity is possible in news reporting. And then we have students producing scripts, reading these aloud and reporting back on them, or discussing scripts which have been chosen by the tutor. Planning, such as a propagandist recruitment campaign. Students posting on social media and then feeding back in terms of applying Habermas's public sphere theory to this. And then there are also role plays as well. And I put this was an interesting one, actually, in terms of record label, indie record labels, major players working with a recording artist and vying then to work with the artist. So I'll move through these a bit more quickly now, but you can see students have a lot of optional modules, they have a lot of individual modules on their journeys. So students are going to have to be adaptable to these different contexts. So for conducting research, students are conducting class interviews, in seminars, their tutors are involving them in data analysis, in coding tweets, interview data, evaluating survey questions. So it's quite a long list here. You can see how these then would all be important for the discipline. For example, for students are working with case studies, given problematic scenarios in which they need to make a decision on. Now, in the school, under this umbrella term of seminars, there's lots of digital production, largely in digital learning laboratories, which also raises the question of the boundaries of the lexical field. So when we're dealing with oral communication and how we want to break this down, and again I can see why the coursebook writers might have been tempted to move away from these specific uses of oral skills. And finally then, just ways in which the employment came through. Students in the seminars, for example, when they've designed their digital products, would pitch them. So there's skills of persuasion here. Students would be, well, I think the idea of this was to develop some resilience, but students after workplace were talking about themes such as alienation. And then there was kind of more planning activities. This last one, C, the observed class, was when the Leeds Reading Music Festival was announced, and it was an all-male lineup, and it hit the headlines for having no female musical artists on the lineup. And so students, very much in a replication of what they would need to do in a professional context, had to decide as a group who they would participate to the debate. So there's quite a lot of the data there, but I felt it was important to show you how once we go into the discipline, this is what comes out of it. And it would be the same if I'd gone into business, if I'd gone into psychology, etc. I'm sure I would find this same rich detail. Now, I feel it's perhaps for many of us, even though we're increasingly trying to introduce disciplinarity, we're building more links with disciplinary subject specialists. It can be more difficult to get this research, because if you're looking at written discourse genres, you can see these in the assessments, you can look at the submitted work, etc. With these, the fine detail only came through when I was doing the interviews and sitting in on classes. But what I'm suggesting then is that there is this complexity which we're perhaps not building into our thinking about developing oral communication. That the discipline itself, here I've shown you these 4 general functions of media and communication, are determining this. So I think we need to go beyond just simply thinking about the generalized empirical ontological underpinnings, but also within social sciences, for example, we can see lots of differences. And I think we need to be kind of really preparing students for these specific contexts. So one of the things I'm looking at doing in Leeds is to make students far more aware of these. I'm interested in helping them to develop their metacognitive strategies for thinking about how they would approach these situations, for helping them to be confident not just in using the skills which often do appear in the course books in a general abstract sense, but using them in the sense of digital products, using them in the sense of the kind of activities they'll need to be using here. So when I talk about in 7, the pedagogic tasks and the linguistic foci, I find that now there's more of an evidence base to this. We're better positioned to do that. I'm not sure how long that's been there, but I think I'm just going to tell myself to just put it up. Yeah. So as you can see, it's a call then really for us to investigate more. I think I was listening to when I look back at the original title for this, I can see I was listening to Neil Young at the time, and the idea of the gold rush came into that. But I feel it's a very high value, which is placed on written discourse genres in the approach, and certainly I feel that that's something that I've been guilty of, and that really this kind of work also in oral discourse genres can be equally productive. Yeah. Okay, I don't know if people have got questions. I realised later there should have been a thank you in there, and thanks for your attention. Any questions about that?